PowerPoint.
Oh, I got it in there.
The town board members could now mute themselves just so there's no background noise until you speak.
Okay. Can you see my screen where it says town board meeting November 9th?
Okay.
Good. All right. So just the city passed their budget for 2021 last Wednesday evening. The fire department budget is $11,366,096. It's a 0.8% increase over 2020. Staffing levels are reduced by 2 firefighter positions and 1 deputy fire chief position. And as we get through this, you'll see why we ended up, cutting back on some of our staff positions because we had some increases. But it's a 3.5% decrease in staff salaries, a 14% decrease in new equipment purchases. We didn't have a lot of money in new equipment purchases last year, so a small change makes it like a big percentage. It really, dollar-wise, it wasn't. We had a 1.3% increase in medical insurance costs and a 2.7% increase in administrative and program. But our largest increase, which is what every municipality is facing this year, is the pension contribution, and that increase was an 18% increase, which was that alone was greater than the cuts we had done in other areas. So that's kind of gives you a quick clip of what the budget was affected by. Just talk about new equipment, just so that people know what we buy out of our budget. This coming year, we have one of our staff vehicles is due to replace. It's a 13-year-old vehicle. The miles are right up there, so it's due to replace. We've got I believe it's $45,000 or $50,000 allocated for that. That's typically a all-wheel drive vehicle, but we're spending more money on it without outfitting it with lights and stuff, but also because we're going with hybrid or electric. We're not sure what this next vehicle is, probably most likely hybrid. We're continuing with a portable replacement plan. This is a multi-year replacement plan where we're trying to replace our portables. We buy a set every year to replace, and old ones that have been in the department since 2008. They're well past their expected use, but they've been holding up really well. So we've been trying to replace some every year, and fire hose replacement as well. We're doing some additional fire hose replacement. This may be the last year that we're going to have to do fire hose replacement, and that'll be put in the parking lot for a few years before we have to get more. Funded positions for the fire department: a fire chief, administrative coordinator, 6 assistant fire chiefs, 8 fire lieutenants, and 49 firefighter positions, which is the same number of firefighters that we had 3 years ago. We were actually hoping to get back to 51 firefighters this year. We had 2 positions to fill. With the pandemic, we did not fill those. And in fact, we've had other vacancies, and because of the uncertain financial times, the city as a whole did a hiring freeze. Unfortunately for us, till we really got a handle on what the financial situation was going to be, particularly with sales tax and funding, government, local aid to municipalities, we didn't really know what we're going to have to work with. So we had positions that became vacant through retirements, and we did not fill those. And unfortunately, we missed the opportunity to hire new firefighters and get them into the academy back in August, because it was an unknown period. So the vacancies that we have to fill in 2021, we have 5 firefighter positions to fill and 1 assistant chief position to fill. We'll be sending 6 firefighters off to hiring 6 firefighters to place all these positions to backfill the promotion, et cetera. And we'll be training those positions through the spring with the expectation the academies are going to run in the spring as they typically do. and they will be trained and hopefully ready to go on the line sometime in late July. Administration and program, and I did send Rod the city's adopted budget, so you can actually look at all the lines. And so when you look at administration and program, there was a slight increase in there. That increase is primarily due to increase in our contractual lines that will be used to update the fire department management system. It's a software system. We're transitioning from a local server-based software system to a cloud-based software system. In fact, there's nobody supporting server-based software anymore. Everything is now cloud-based, but the system we're using is at end of life, and we need to transition to a new platform. This is a software that manages our scheduling, keeps track of payroll items for, when people are sick and call in and overtime and things like that. Also, it's the same product we use for managing our incident reports, our personnel records, training, maintenance, fire inspections, fire hydrant inspections. So it's a pretty comprehensive package that we'll be bringing in. And our hope is we actually have used 3 pieces of software to do all this training. We hope to bring it all in and put it under one umbrella. So that's the goal, but it's a significant increase in our budget, and this will be this is not a 1-year increase. It's going to be like this for several years moving forward. Let's see. And last, the city did approve a capital project. Typically, capital projects, you get approved, you buy it, and it has it delivered in 2020 in the same year that you order it. Fire truck manufacturers are, it takes them longer to produce trucks than it does fire apparatus than it does cars. We're looking at over 360 days, over a year production time, just because industry is kind of backlogged. So we expect that we'll be ordering this sometime in 2021, probably the spring, and we'll look for a delivery sometime in the late spring, early summer of 2022. The amount of money we have budgeted is $690. We are trying to move our fleet into more greener fleet. We are buying apparatus. In fact, our first one's going to be delivered in January with it's called idle reduction technology. It's basically when the truck's not pumping water and it's just parked on the street, maybe we're going to a medical call or standing by for a fire alarm investigation. The truck will actually shut off and it will run on a battery system, and it reduces the amount of idling and helps with our carbon footprint. The problem is that for the fire industry, the technology is still fairly new, and it's still being adapted into the traditional diesel powered fire apparatus. So we're going to continue with that. We're hoping that the technology will be a little bit more mature next year, so that we'll get even better results out of reducing our carbon footprint. So that's kind of a quick overview of our budget, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. And if you do have questions after you read through it and you want to send me an email, I'm happy to answer those questions and get into the weeds of our budget if you need more.
And I know we had also forwarded the last report that you sent. If any board members have questions about that as well. So Rich?
Hi, Rich.
Yeah, hey, Tom. You indicated that there were maybe a half a dozen positions that are vacant, but that had been not budgeted for, but there were additional funds that were acquired in July, but the positions weren't filled. So what happens to the funding related to those positions? Is that just rolled over to next year's budget, or is this budget amount in addition to the funds that were requisitioned for those positions this year?
Yeah, that funding wasn't rolled over. It's actually was used to kind of reduce our budget, because we've had reduced. It was a hiring freeze. We didn't fill positions, so that was kind of it's basically keeping us under budget. We've had some increases in operational cost, particularly in overtime. Not where we're way out of control, but our overtime costs are running a little higher this year because of COVID. We've had obviously some folks that have had to take some time off for family, and and some people, I guess I'll be honest, people, we don't encourage people to come to work if they don't feel well. If they got the sniffles or something mild, which we might think as well, it's a little bit of a flu or something like that. With COVID out there, we don't encourage our people to come to work. So there's a little bit more use of sick leave and family leave because of that. So
that money, I just want to be clear, that money was used to reduce your budget shortfall in the fire department. It wasn't returned to the general fund in the city or anything of that nature.
No, and it's when the city bills the town, we actually bill the town based on our actual expenses. So if we save money or reduce our costs, it's reducing your costs as well. So that's and Mike can probably talk about how that billing goes, but I think it's done quarterly, and we send here's what our expenses are, and then so it's not like we're banking the money away and saving it for a rainy day.
Right, but that's all based on a percentage that's determined every calendar year, or is that just over the length of the contract? I'm not sure about that. The percentage that the town pays according to the contract.
It's a percentage of the contract of that year. Every year that percentage is recalculated, but the actual cost, you don't see those costs until we send the bill at the end of that quarter. And then at the end of the year, Steve Thayer and Mike get together and they reconcile that total amount of money. I think Mike can tell you that we don't go over budget. I don't know that we have ever gone over budget in the last few years. We're pretty close to our budget.
Okay.
Under. We're going to be I think overall we're going to be under this year. With all the increased personnel costs due to COVID, I think with leaving these positions vacant is going to help us. But also when we're short 5 positions, due to retirements and people separating from service, we incur overtime to keep all the shifts filled. So we got a couple shifts that are short. So when multiple people are on vacation, we may have to pay overtime for a shift. A shift is 2 days, 2 nights. So, and next spring, it's going to be kind of the same situation. We're probably going to be spending more on overtime, but our cost of labor hopefully will be down. We're going to carry some savings at the back end of the year, where our overtime is going to be way down because we'll be fully staffed. So,
do you anticipate that costs are going to revert to the mean, your historical mean, based on the fact that IC is coming back, for example? Do you see that as a driver of the number of calls that you have to respond to or anything?
Well, that's an interesting, you brought the issue on call volume. With Ithaca College and Cornell kind of dialed back, our call volume is decreased. I was assuming it was mostly due to students, but talking to my peers across the state, overall, fire and medical emergencies, actually the call volume is down, 10 to 15% across the state. With people staying home, they're not traveling, they're, I guess you call it less mobile. It's caused less calls, less emergencies. Overall fire, the actual number of fires has decreased. Now that's been for 9 months. I can tell you in the last few weeks, I don't know. I think it's probably with more activity, but in the last few weeks, we've seen our call volume move back to more normal numbers. We run, 100, 110 calls a week during the normal times. And over the summer and in the spring, we were down to 70 or 80 calls a week. We're back up. Last week we had 103 calls. So it's cycling back to normal, but we're not in normal times. So I think
Thanks, Tom.
hard to put a metric on it.
Sure.
Other questions for Tom? Bill?
Thanks for that info, Tom. Good to see you. And I was wondering about the impact of the pandemic on call volumes as well as staffing and budget. So that question you pretty much answered, but then that reminded me, one thing I did notice a lot, it seemed at least like there was a flurry of gorge rescues this summer. It seemed like I was reading a lot about them in Ithaca Voice and elsewhere. So I'm wondering if the volume of those was abnormally high, and also has the city talked at all about trying to figure out a way to collect some money from, because I assume those are pretty expensive calls.
Yeah, Billy, because our call volume has been fairly low, we've been actually managing a lot of the gorge rescues within our existing resources. We haven't had but a few times to bring in additional labor to manage it. But what's happening in Ithaca is not unique to Ithaca. In fact, it's a problem that's across the state, where we have recreational trails. I know this. I was in the Adirondacks over the summer, and the rangers have been very, very busy doing rescues in the wilderness areas of the Adirondacks. People are going out and they're hiking in areas that they're unfamiliar with. They're unprepared to do the hiking. Some of our rescues this year have been gone such as either Treeman or Upper Buttermill, to help people that have gone up the trail, and their physical fitness was not such that they could complete their hike, and so they've called us to help carry them back out or assist them back out of the gorges. I mean, that's just a new phenomena that we aren't familiar with. The other thing that we've noticed is that when we've been out on the trails, and I'm sure some of them, hopefully all of you have been out on the trails in our community, it's very obvious they've been highly used this year. We're seeing much wider paths than normal where people have been walking. So clearly there's a lot more foot traffic going in and out on these trails. And I think that's partly why, people are out there hiking, they're wearing masks, they're trying to distance. Trails are getting wider. People are saying, I want to stay away from other people. So they get off the trails and they get into places probably where they shouldn't. So there's all kinds of, things. Most of this stuff I'm telling you is anecdotal, but the facts are our call volume for gorge rescues are gone up. I think it's because there's a lot more activity in the gorges. People are out there, they're cooped up at their home. They got to get out, and obviously they can't socialize in crowded groups. So they're getting out by themselves or with small groups and hiking the trails and enjoying nature. And it's driving our call volume up. But again, it's not just us, it's around the state.
Great. Any other questions before we move on? So Tom, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You can, of course, stay on as long as you want, but we understand it if you decide to exit right now.
Okay, I've got a little work to do, but I'm probably going to stay here and listen for a little while.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you for.
So there are two items that are our public hearings, but we want to open it up to see if there's anyone who would like to speak to the board for an item not that doesn't have a public hearing. Any persons to be heard? And Becky or Marty, do you know?
I don't see anybody. We do have an individual on the phone, so if they would like to speak, I believe if you hit pound and 9, it may indicate to us that you would like to speak. I don't see anybody, Rod.
Okay. So then moving on to our first public hearing. So this is for the adopting the new town map. There are just a couple of minor changes that we're making. We're adding the date to the top. We're changing the public hearing date to today. And we're changing, it says a resolve clause says the official map is dated November 3rd, but we're changing that to November 9th. So there were just some minor changes to what you were sent out. So are there any members of the public who would like to address the town board about the adoption of amendments and revisions to the official map of the town of Ithaca?
I don't see anybody wishing to speak at this time.
Okay, I didn't name, I opened the public hearing. I didn't name a time. I think it was 5:55. We'll close the public hearing in a minute or so. Do we know what Joe Corona is on for?
No, I do not know. And I believe that any comments that we've received on this topic, I think Paulette has emailed out to everybody, and or Becky has emailed out to everybody.
Okay. Okay, I'll close the public hearing at 5:56. I might not have gotten the times exactly right, but we'll close the public hearing on the official map of the town of Ithaca. Is there someone who would like to move the resolution? Eric, is there a second? Tian? Discussion, questions, comments? Pat? Pat, you're muted.
Sorry.
Oh, you muted yourself again.
Mute. Okay. Am I unmuted? All
You are.
right. Okay. Are we incorporating the suggestions of the Britton brothers?
We did, Sue, do you want to address that? You're muted, Sue.
I can only address it from the standpoint of him. So his comment was that shouldn't we leave, I just forgot the name of the road, sorry.
Bluegrass.
Bluegrass Lane. Shouldn't we leave the kind of the extension, the farm road that goes off of Bluegrass Lane on the official map? Because if there's a fear, he has a fear that if we don't, we won't recall that there is a kind of the 2007 transportation plan indicated that that would be part of a multi-use trail. And my response to that was that I don't feel like it needs to be on the official map. Where it needs to be is, continue to be in our transportation plan and continue to be in our park and open space plan, because that's where we're going to look to see where we should put our future multi-use trails. I don't feel like the official map is someplace we're going to go to tell us that we're going to have a multi-use trail. And I think maybe Ben or Dan can talk more about just the fact that it did not meet the criteria. So it was not put on the official map.
Ben or Dan, you want to chime in?
That's true. We evaluated a bunch of different roads around town. Some, we obviously have a master list of what we looked at. And this road did not meet the criteria for the emergency access and structural stability. So yes, that's the major reason that we did not put this on the map.
And anything to
just that we also reached out to Cornell on that one, and they concurred that it's not a passable route. It shouldn't be on a map.
Okay. So Pat, that answered your question?
Thank you. Yeah.
Other comments? If not, are we ready to vote? So all those in favor of the resolution, if you could raise your hand or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Anyone opposed? It looks like it's unanimous. Thank you very much for those who worked on that. Moving on to open the public hearing for the next item, which is the adoption of the new neighborhood code related town code amendments. It feels like there should be a drum roll for the new neighborhood code. Lots of people have been working on it for a while. So if anyone on the public wants to address either the seeker or the resolution, I open the public hearing at 5:59. I do not believe that we have any members of the public. We did verify with Joe that he's here just to listen in. He address the town board on any specific matter.
So I don't see anybody wishing to speak to this.
I'm just going to wait a couple seconds before I close the public hearing. Maybe for the same time on my side. So we'll close the public hearing at 6 o'clock and turn our attention to the seeker resolution related to this. And there's several components. It's a local law adding chapter 272 to the Town of Ithaca Code, titled New Neighborhood Code. It's adding new neighborhood code references to Ithaca Town Code chapter 270. And also references to Ithaca Town Code chapter 234 subdivision of the land. Would someone like to move the seeker resolution, which shows declares a negative determination? Yep. Is there a second? Well,
Hey, Rod, I'm sorry to interject. Is anyone else having problems with Rod's
Yes.
audio?
Yes.
Yes.
They're better now.
Okay.
I didn't do anything.
You just get muffled? You
Yeah, it
come
got a
in-
little muffly.
I do hear a muffling in the background, but I don't think it's coming from, anyway. Right now I'm hearing a muffled sound, but can you hear me okay right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So discussion, comments about the seeker.
About the seeker, I might have a couple of things, quick things. This is, I don't know how far down this road to go, but in the page that describes the project, full environmental assessment form, part 1, project and setting. And I don't know about the new neighborhood code. The first paragraph refers to them as traditional neighborhood development projects. And I wonder whether we need the word projects, because they don't all have to be projects in order to fall under the new code, right? So I would just say that we strike the word projects in the first paragraph, if that's okay. Let me see what else I have. And we're also considering the resolution, or just the seeker? We're doing the seeker separately?
Yeah, just the seeker right now.
Just the seeker then. That's all I had, was just that one small modification request.
And before we go back to, so I think, Rich, you were the one who,
I think I moved.
who seconded?
Bill?
No, Bill, are you fine with the change? Okay. Tian, did I see your hand up for comments about seeker?
I just wanted to ask a question, just for myself, for point of clarification on the, when you get to the impact on land portion of the seeker. And I understand that in the context of this meeting that we are not approving projects, we are approving the adoption of the code, the neighborhood code. At what point will we be assessing the environmental impacts of the possible development that might occur as a result of adopting this? Would that be, if and when would those be under review?
Okay, that would be at the, am I unmuted right now?
Yes,
Yes.
you are.
Okay, great. That would be at the regulating plan stage, when somebody comes in to rezone land that's like a master plan, what we call a regulating plan. At that stage, which the town board does approve because it's a rezoning, that's when you would be looking at the seeker. But there's also seeker that would be involved for some site-specific development that's going to be within a neighborhood, just like there is for some site-specific development within an area that has conventional zoning as well. but you would be looking at seeker for a specific regulating plan / master plan for one of the new neighborhoods.
So I'm sorry, did we, I think I probably asked this question at the committee level, but would we be considering a GEIS for the entire development area? How would we accomplish seeker? Because not everything that happens in a TND is going to rise to the level of a regulating plan, right? What if somebody with a half an acre or an acre wants to do something in the TND area? They're not going to have to devise a regulating plan, right? But they're supposed to conform to the parameters of a regulating plan that may or may not exist at that point in time, right?
Well, they couldn't get a regulating plan for a half acre because
that's what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
How do we deal with to go to Tian's question? So how do we deal with the full build out scenario in the TND areas? How do we quantify the potential environmental impacts of that?
I think some of that we're going to have to do on a case by case basis when somebody, to involve, you have a situation where, let's say in the West Hill area where the comp plan identifies it as being, medium density TND, is a regulating plan for one property owner in an area that might cover 200 acres. Is that going to, it's not a total build out scenario of that area. I think we'd be looking at just that 200 acres because it's just that development. We don't know when the rest of that area that the comp plan designates as TND gets built out. And it's not necessarily, I think it's something we'd have to discuss at that time. Whether
you're saying, Dan, just so I'm clear, that the transects won't be defined until the regulating plan is devised. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Right. Because the transects are just zones and the regulating plan is what it rezones the land plus lays out the basic.
So how do we avoid segmentation issues?
That's a good question. I think, I would bounce it to Sue for a little bit. I think these are things that we have to look at on a case by case basis though. If somebody comes in with 200 acres over a 400 acre area, are we going to say that it's segmentation if they don't build, because it's not the full 400 acre area? Well, then, we have to look at the rest of our comprehensive plan and we see that we've got land that is designated for what we call, like, for instance, that's called existing neighborhood that might have existing MDR zoning, but it's not developed yet. It's not subdivided yet. When we see one subdivision next to another, is that an incremental situation? I think, again, there's no really, I don't have a good answer to this. I think it's all something that's going to be on a case by case basis though.
So let's go to Bill first and then Sue. It looked like you wanted to chime in. Bill?
Yeah, and Sue, maybe you were going to say this, but you can comment and correct me on anything that I say. But what I recall some of our discussions in the past have been is we've talked about, the fact that there's these three main areas, East Hill, South Hill, and West Hill. In East Hill, we assume Cornell is going to drive that process and their planning, and we'll make them responsible for the charrettes and the work on East Hill. But in South Hill and West Hill, the town on its own can come up with a regulating plan. We don't have to wait for a landowner to decide to do something.
Right.
We've talked about contacting, primarily on South Hill, it's, the Munkmeyers, and Dave Auble has some land that he wants to do. And we've already, did a type of charrette a number of years ago on that. So we've talked about moving ahead as the next phase of this whole process. This is just the first phase of a long process, adopting this law. We've talked about working on a charrette for South Hill and trying to figure out the regulating plan. And then on West Hill, there are primarily 6 major landowners. I think it might be about 6. It might actually be maybe 4 that are the largest landowners for the area on West Hill that we're talking about. And so we always assume that we'd turn our attention to South Hill first because there seemed most interest in sooner development there sooner than on West Hill. But at some point we can turn to West Hill and get together with the major landowners on West Hill and say, look, you know, is this a good time to get together and start working on a charrette and a regulating plan for West Hill? So we don't just have to wait for somebody to come to us. And I know that, you know, Sue and Susan Brock can jump in too on the segmentation issue, but I think at least in my recollection, we were hoping to come up, you know, have some charrettes and come up with a regulating plan for the whole area on each hill, so that we wouldn't have to worry about segmentation. So Sue, I'll let you add in.
Yeah, you know, for obviously in East Hill, it's likely that the whole area will be under one regulating plan. You have one property owner, but as Bill was saying, on West Hill, we have several property owners. And I do know that there's at least one, maybe more, that have no interest at this point in doing any development on their land. So, you know, if the town, as Bill said, you know, the town could come in and be the applicant essentially for getting a regulating plan for that greater West Hill area, or the other way that the new neighborhood code allows a regulating plan to happen is by an application. So you have a, you know, property owner come in who wants to apply and, you know, get the new neighborhood code and utilize the new neighborhood code. Well, if that happens, then we, in my mind, I always thought we would just do an environmental review on the area that is being, that would have a regulating plan. So it would just be on the application for that area and not necessarily the entire area. I mean, West Hill, it's a large area. So I guess we'll have to decide it as things happen there. But if we had just one landowner and it was 200 acres, that's a fair amount of, that's a big piece of land to even be rezoning. So, you know, maybe that's enough. And if the other areas aren't, you know, if it's one side of Mecklenburg Road and the other side of Mecklenburg Road, maybe we just do the environmental review just on that one area. Just that's one possibility. But it, you know, if we wanted to, you know, try to get everybody together to do the entire West Hill area, you know, that's another possibility. But the new neighborhood code, the procedures do allow for smaller areas to be to have established regulating plans. That answer your question, Rich?
Yeah, but just to go back to what Bill was saying, isn't it in those areas where we have more flexibility because there's not a lot of build out yet, isn't it to our advantage to kind of explore a more comprehensive regulating plan for those areas rather than wait for things to come in a kind of piecemeal fashion?
I think so, but especially if they're contiguous with one another, you know, if the land is right next to each other, it would be better to do it that way. If it's separated by a road like Mecklenburg Road, or, you know, it's north of Bundy Road, maybe, you know, we can decide at that time whether we want to try to, you know, pull the other property owners, encourage them to participate too.
Susan, did you want to say anything about this?
Sue and Bill really covered everything.
So Rich, Tian?
All right, so maybe explain to me how this might play out. We'll take East Hill off the table. Let's focus on West Hill for a moment. So a developer comes in, has a proposal, we create a regulating plan. I mean, is there some ceiling of environmental impacts that we do not want to crash through with the full build out of all of these properties? How do we, at what point do we take a whole look at the impacts of this law? We're going to do it piecemeal? Is that what I'm understanding you say? We'll do it applicant by applicant?
Not necessarily, Tian, and it's more property owners, and there's, you know, they're
Right.
major
Well,
property owners.
Right. the
And,
property.
it's interesting. We did talk about this during the committee meetings about the seeker process and what if we reached, a particular density that we did not want to go above. And, or transportation impacts that we don't want to go above before we have to put stoplights in, for instance, or, that the mitigation would be quite a bit. So we did talk about that. And I think, I don't know if we came to a decision, but we would be looking at those kind of things really carefully. And that would be one of the benefits of then doing maybe not separating the areas quite so much, so that we can look at the whole comprehensive environmental impacts of the area.
When you say not separating the areas, do you mean not separating the individually owned parcels?
Well, I look at it as areas like north of Bundy Road, south of Bundy Road,
Okay.
south of Mecklenburg Road. I see those as very different. They could be very different neighborhoods too. They're quite, there's long ways between north of Bundy Road and south of Mecklenburg Road. Would we feel like we have to, I don't know. I guess I have to think about this a little bit more on how we would do it once we get applications in, and whether we want to try to pull other areas in at the same time.
So we're kind of not prepared for this. Say we pass this law and next week we have, 2 applicants come in. We're not, I know that you've reached out to people, but we're not really prepared to evaluate.
No,
Wait. I mean, is there any way that 2 or 3 owners could kind of max out density, et cetera, within these areas?
Well, I think, can I just, before Bill, just one comment. I think the main issue, the main driver, the main issue is going to be traffic. That's often is the issue. And so the traffic situation of north of Bundy Road is really going to be largely on Route 96, whereas the traffic impacts perhaps on Mecklenburg and south of Mecklenburg are going to be on Mecklenburg Road itself. So, in some ways you could separate those transportation issues out based on where the location is.
Bill, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say that I believe if, let's say, to take a likely example, John Rancich comes in and says he wants to do something. He's got about 70 acres just south of Mecklenburg Road, across from Linderman Creek. And then he's got about 150 acres, I believe, around Linderman Creek. And so the first thing we would do is hold a charrette, and we would then, get in touch with Conifer, which has a bunch of acreage, between Linderman Creek and the town park up there. And then check in with, the Perrys and Segrichis and the other folks who have big land up there. And through the charrette is where we would, is how we would start the process of figuring out the regulating plan. Because then, we'd have to have a regulating plan proposal in place before we could even do a seeker on it. And so in coming up with the regulating plan, we would be investigating all of those, issues of transportation and other issues of mitigation that would have to go into the seeker that we would need to do on the regulating plan. That's how I remember the sort of sequence of it. And so obviously, as some of you might recall from having been through charrettes before, that's going to be a whole long process in itself, just holding all the public meetings and, probably hiring a consultant and doing all that work. So there's going to be a lot of time spent, just trying to figure out where the transects are going to be within that area.
One more thing too to remember is that we have our comprehensive plan that guides, recommends a range of density in the areas that it targets for traditional neighborhood development. So in the West Hill area, it's looking at, medium density T&D is the designation, or at least the character district or designation for the West Hill area. Not all the West Hill area, but the areas that it identifies as being ideal for TND, and looks like it looks at a gross density of 5 to 8 units per acre. So if you're looking at maxing something out, if somebody comes in, if you have a property owner that comes in and they say, I want a zone in a way where, and we do have in the code, there's a designation, or at least when it comes to allocating zones, for these areas that are in the medium density, whatever, that you would have more of the NT3, kind of the lower density residential, less of the NT4, NT5. But you would arrange your transects in a way and ultimately subdivide your land in a way where you don't get over that maximum density. If somebody comes in with proposing a TND that on West Hill that is 20 units an acre overall, well, that doesn't meet our comp plan recommendation. Sure, I mean, could you do it? Would the zoning allow it? Possibly, but would town board approve it? Probably not, because it really exceeds what we have in mind. I think, when our pre-app process, if somebody came in and really wanted to max something out, we would say, you're within your right to apply for it, but we highly discourage you from doing so, because I can tell you that the town board probably will not approve it. Ultimately, you're the ones that make the decision. I think, the neighbors, anything else, that I think, they would have a tough time ahead. So we do have our comp plan to look to for guidance as well.
Dan, did we answer your questions?
Well, kind of, but I just need to understand the process that is there something that requires a charrette in all of this? Or is this just something that we intend to do? Is there some...
A charrette is required because for anything above a certain size, a charrette is required because of the possible impacts in the surrounding area. And also because designing one of these neighborhoods, it's a collaborative process.
Right.
And we want to see others get involved. We want to see neighbors get involved. Anybody who you would consider to be a stakeholder, town board, they would all get involved as part of that messy process of the charrette designing the neighborhood. So. And
is it your intention to address this seeker issue to, as you say, you haven't figured this out yet? Is it your intention to try to figure this out?
Well, I think it goes on a case-by-case basis, like any development, like any project that comes along. What happens if, we've got MDR zoning on West Hill right now? What if somebody comes in with zoning, over half of the area? Let's say I'm looking at my map here between, let's say, Luxembourg and Bundy right now.
I don't think, Dan, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. Tim,
okay,
go ahead. We haven't got it figured out.
Yeah.
I think the process is in place where I don't think it's a matter that we don't have it figured out.
Right.
So Susan, maybe I do want you to weigh in and just Susan Brock to clarify that issue of it not being figured out yet.
Well, I think Dan was trying to explain, this is really just like any other request for rezoning, whether it's in TND or in a conventional zone. We have to wait and see what the proposal is, and then we decide, do we do, what's the environmental review process it unfolds? Is a GEIS appropriate? Is a site-specific environmental review process appropriate? So I think the problem with giving you a really definitive answer is it depends on what comes in and what is being put in front of the town board for approval. But don't forget, this rezoning is always at the discretion of the town board. So if town board members feel the environmental review process is showing unacceptable impacts, of course, the town board would be fully within its rights not to approve the proposed rezoning.
And Dan, my apologies for cutting you off. I know you were heading in that direction.
Right, yeah.
You have a question?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think I'm going to attempt to read Tian's mind, which is, I think we usually have some telepathy going. But I think the question is, assuming that we have to evaluate these individual zoning change requests as they come in, the question is, are we going to take into consideration those zoning requests that have been granted before these individual, is it going to be a cumulative analysis, or is it going to continue to be this sort of standalone environmental review the way we tend to do those things now? Because we do have an idea, we have an anticipated land use map, we have a general idea of where we want to see this concept unfolding, and the question is, if we look at 10, 20 acre projects separately, is that as efficacious as looking at a 200 acre total build out scenario? I think that's what I'm hearing anyway.
Well, we always look at the existing background conditions. So if you have some portions of the TND which already have been approved and maybe have been partially built out or fully built out within those separate areas, the transportation, the traffic and things like that become the new background condition. So the new proposal comes in and you have to look at the existing conditions. Same thing with, burden on public water, public sewer.
So in that way, it does,
emergency services, things like
in
that.
some ways, it does incentivize the people who get there first, because there are fewer pre-existing conditions. The baseline is lower, essentially, right?
How is that any different from what we have right now, though? I mean, right? All of our resources, our emergency services, everything, whenever we get a project, we look at what's the current ability of this new proposal to absorb the services. So
sure. The only delineation I would make is that we're looking at it at a confined geographic area, as opposed to like a town-wide consideration. And I suppose you do that during the normal course of seeker review anyway.
Yeah. We're looking usually at the area. I mean, it depends. For water and sewer, you're looking at capacity at Bolton Point, wastewater treatment plant. But remember too, the whole point of doing this TND is you're going to be less resource intensive in some respects, including transportation, right? Because you're trying to develop these walkable neighborhoods where you're not requiring everybody to jump in a car. So it's not like a conventional suburban development anymore. So there are benefits to this whole idea and trying to have this TND apply in certain areas of the town for the comp plan recommendations.
Sure.
No.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say that, and ultimately, the town board, or whoever the town board is at the time, is still in the driving seat and can determine how the process unfolds. Even if it's just one landowner that comes into us, we can say, well, we want to do a regulating plan for the entire area. We don't want to just look at your parcel and let you be the first one in the door and take up a lot of the capacity for the entire area. We as a town board are going to say, no, we're going to do a charrette on the entire area, and we're going to come up with a regulating plan and a seeker for the entire area. So we're in the driving seat. We can make that decision at the time when we want to. And as I said, we can even initiate the process and not even wait for a landowner to come to us if we want to. And that's something that I might argue for. I think that's all I had right now.
Are we ready to vote on the seeker? Any other conversation about this?
Oh, let me just take a quick look here, make sure there's nothing else.
And Tom, we're so, that's great that you're hanging in and listen to some of this.
I'm sleeping, man.
Tom is the town resident.
It was, yeah.
Hold on a second. Yeah, that's all I had on the seeker,
Okay.
I do believe.
The person who made the motion and second and approved the one change that we made, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Like it's unanimous. Somebody call me out if I missed anyone, but I think it's unanimous. So great. So now so that was the seeker resolution. Now moving on to the resolution that actually adopts into some existing chapters additional language. So would someone like to move this resolution?
I will move that.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Discussion, comments?
I'll just take this opportunity to thank everybody who's been involved in basically, I think 5 years now, because I think we really started this when I started as supervisor 5 years ago. And so in particular, the members of the working group, and so Rich and Sue and Dan on this call, plus our consultants, we had Noah Demarest and
Rob Studeville and David West.
Rob Studeville and David West on the working group. And then, especially highlight all the work that Dan has put into this, and Sue, and of course, Susan Brock as well towards the end, and, all the staff who reviewed it and commented on it. So a lot of people have put a lot of work into this over a lot of years. I guess it did feel a little anticlimactic to have nobody at the public hearing, but so at least we got through this phase. And as I said, this is just the first phase of a multi-phase process. So I'm very happy that we've gotten to this point of getting through the first phase, and thank everybody for all your efforts over the years.
Thank you, Bill. That was like our drum roll. So thank you, Bill, for putting that in the mix.
Yeah, I think the subtext there is we don't want to see it go back to committee.
Yeah.
I think that's probably safe to say. Other comments, discussion?
Hey, Rod, I think typically you ask Paulette if she's received any comments associated with this in her email, so Becky may be able to answer that for you before you take a vote.
And we will note that there was an email that we received, I think it was in the package, from Fernando D'Aragon, who is he's with the Ithaca Tompkins County Transportation Council. So someone did review his comments, but we didn't see anything that suggested any changes needed to be made. Is that fair to say, Sue?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, all those in favor, aye, or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Yay. Good job.
Okay, who's got the champagne?
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
All your work.
What are you holding up there, Dan?
Vodka.
That's what it looks like to me. Moving on, something very different. This is a resolution of appreciation and recognition for service for John Meggs, who was on the Conservation Board and worked on things such as the Scenic Resources Initiative. He helped initiate the Richard Fisher Conservation Award, worked on the Coy Glen Conservation Zone. He, I think, also donated some land to the town. So would someone like to move the resolution honoring John Meggs? Tien, I saw Tien's hand first, then I saw Eric's. Is there any discussion, comments?
There's just everyone, I'm sure, saw an email from Mike Smith about a hard copy that he would like to have board members sign so it can be presented in person. It's in the back vestibule.
Thank you for reminding folks of that. Any other comments? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Moving on to the next item, authorization for 2020 water and sewer relevying delinquent 2019-2020 water and sewer rents. and it gives the totals of what would be relevied. Would someone like to move this resolution? Eric, is there a second? Rich, did I see your hand up? Comments, discussion? Mike, did you want to say anything about this? Pretty standard that we do this at this time of year.
You're very muffly, Rod.
Yeah, no, I don't know what's going on. Mike,
Okay.
did you say anything? I'm going to exit the meeting just for a minute. Becky, will you let me back in?
We can hear you better now, I think.
All right, Bill, you're in charge. Now's your chance.
The coup will begin.
Oh,
The mutiny.
I got to remember we're live on YouTube and we're being recorded.
I don't think anyone will take exception to those comments as
Can
we
you hear me
chuckle
better
along.
now? Is it any better?
we'll let you know.
Mike, did you want to say anything about this?
Not really. It's about 8.7% higher than last year. As far as the delinquent relevy total goes, the billing credit total is higher because of a double payment that the hospital had made, I think in the third or fourth quarter. Other than that, it wasn't a huge increase that we could attribute to the COVID-19. So other than that, I really didn't have anything else to say.
Thanks. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Moving on to the approval of the collective bargaining agreement with United Auto Workers for the Southern Cuyahoga Lake Intermunicipal Water Commission's employees for 2021 through 2023. The contract, I think we made just one change to the resolution. In the first whereas, we're going to say that for the contract that will expire on December 31st, 2020. Would someone like to move the resolution? Eric and Tian, did I see your hand for a second? Do you want Judy to give some basic highlights? You've got the memo in front of you, but does anyone want Judy to just quickly review some of the highlights or any questions that folks have, discussion? Rich?
I had a question. In the Article 17 wages, and it says these are characterized as will receive a minimum of. And so I guess it's just a really general question, maybe this is something I just haven't noticed over the years, but in exchange for a guaranteed minimum, shouldn't there also be a cap or a maximum? Or is this, we just keep that open so that the collective bargaining compensation will always more or less mirror the non-collective bargaining? I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Judy, do you have a comment about that?
That's just the language that was started when we started with the contract. I think in some of the beginning years, we did have a min and a max, so.
Okay, but we don't anymore. And so what dynamics could alter this if, let's say, the cost of living, CPI goes, through the roof or something? This would be subject to renegotiation at that point? Or would they be locked in?
They would be pretty well locked in. There's other, there's certainly things that the employer can try to reopen. There was, for example, the COVID issue. There were some contracts that were reopened to look at staffing levels and stuff, not for the town of Ithaca or Bolton Point, but that is something that can reopen a contract. Usually you're looking at like an MOU. We've had different things that we've done MOUs on, so.
Mm-hmm. Just moving down the road, does the town of Ithaca recognize Juneteenth as a holiday?
Yeah, when we're looking at our revisions to our personnel manual, actually in a resolution coming up later tonight, you'll see our new holiday listing, which does include Juneteenth.
Okay, and leave time, sick time has been increased, and personal time, it appears that those have increased. Is that just an alternate form of compensation, or is there some sort of underlying usage data to reflect that needed to be addressed?
That was actually bringing it up to match the town of Ithaca.
Okay, thanks for that. And let me see if there's anything else. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Nan?
Relative to vacation buyback, that went from 40 to 80, and you're allowed to sell back up to 80 hours. What is there a cap on that in terms of how much of it can be used towards insurance after retirement?
Vacation time cannot be used.
Okay.
Insurance. So this vacation buyback happens in November every year.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why we increased it from 40 to 80 for Bolton Point is because they're very small staff. So having somebody try to use all of their vacation causes other overtime.
Okay.
So we have some, especially like our night person where we only have one person and he's been very loyal. Being able to sell vacation time back is very helpful to the management.
Thank you.
And Susan, did I see your hand up?
Going back to Rich's first question about the use of the word minimum in Article 17, since that seems to be a vestige of something that doesn't exist anymore, could you eliminate the word minimum in those 3 instances where it shows up so that the wages will receive a 2.5% increase, et cetera, as opposed to saying a minimum? That eliminates any ambiguity, and it doesn't preclude reopening the contract if there's some need to. But to me, it just seems saying it's a minimum implies something else could be sitting out there.
I really hate to open anything right now. This has been through the UAW. This has been through Bolton Point. It's just now a process of getting it through the other 5 municipalities. So I would really hate to change any language in this right now.
At the same time, we have an obligation to review this, right? So this is our opportunity to weigh in, and it might be inconvenient, but if it's a substantive issue, then so be it.
Well, it's actually not a substantive change, and this happens all the time, that little changes like this get made. I mean, I've seen tentative agreements that get ratified by both actually the UAW and another party in this situation. And after all of that had happened, some of the UAW leadership sat down and they really poured through the contract, and they had some additional wording adjustments that didn't really change anything in terms of substance. So I think as long as it reflects everybody's intent, this really shouldn't be something that would have to go back to UAW even for a vote. I think you'd obviously need to talk to the team at UAW and make sure that this reflects their intent, but I assume it does.
And Judy, I know has it already gone out to the other municipalities as well?
Yeah, that's fine. I can talk to the UAW and stuff on it. It's fine. Whatever you want me to do.
Bill?
Yeah, I was going to say not to bother with it now, because this is a little more difficult to make change because we have to get 5 municipal boards to do it. And I don't believe it's a material change. By having minimum in there, it says that we have to pay them that amount. I mean, if you want to interpret it technically, it means that we could pay them more, but we at least have to pay them that amount. Obviously, we would not decide to pay them more. We would decide to just pay them the minimum. So I don't think it's a material change. And because of the process of having to go through the 5 municipalities that are part of Bolton Point, I don't think it's a change that needs to be made at this time. It can be noted for the next contract when we get around to the next contract.
I'm very willing to discuss it with the UAW and stuff before we sign the contract, because all 5 municipalities have to agree before we even sign the contract. So
It's not a big deal. I mean, I don't think it doesn't change.
So yeah, let's move forward if folks are okay.
Maybe, maybe the next time this comes up, we'll reconsider the language.
The one thing I would note, I don't recall, Judy, if that's the language we're currently using in our town of Ithaca contract with Teamsters also.
we word things differently in our Teamsters contract. This is how it was written in the very first contract, so.
Any further discussion? Rich?
Sorry, I did have a quick question. Under sick time, I just want to make sure that the maximum of 165 days of cumulative sick time can be used to increase service credit in the New York State retirement system. That doesn't need to be reconciled with the number of sick days that we're allowing. Those two numbers are different, 175 and 165, right? Those are supposed to be different numbers.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we increased it by 10 hours is just to give somebody who is maxed out at the end of their career, if they need to use a few hours, they're not always trying to get it back up before their date of retirement to max out that 165 days. So that's why we gave them 10-day.
Sure. Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was more of a just a visual thing. Thanks.
Any other comments? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Again, tell me if I missed somebody. Moving on. Thank you, Judy. So we did talk last time, I believe, about the COVID response policy. This went back to Personnel Committee and they made some, not many changes. We added some, it really didn't change much from, I think, the last time you saw this, but we wanted it to come to the town board. Judy, remind me what perhaps is different than the last time they may have seen this. I know we packaged everything together. We added, I know, Pat, you added some language just clarifying who might be in that high risk category, spelling that out. I know we made changes that said masks need to be worn in the conference rooms. We reinstituted that people need to take their temperatures as they enter the buildings again. I think those were the major changes. I'm looking at Judy, Pam, and Pat. Do you remember different? Pat?
Yeah, and some of them,
sorry. Go ahead, Judy.
I was going to say some of this, you know, is a compilation of all of the resolutions that you had passed, and trying to put it all into one document instead of all the separate resolutions. And then the travel one, there is changes due to Governor Cuomo's most recent changes. So I was trying to summarize that in the very last, that as he changes things, we will, you know, base any changes made by the governor.
Okay, so Judy, can you hear me?
Yes.
talked to Judy a little bit earlier today about that. And I did come up with some wording to make it more conforming to the latest changes. If I can just read you that.
But if he changes it again, does that mean we have to come back and redo the resolution if we put something fairly specific in?
Well, I don't know. I'm just suggesting the changes right now, and we can change it based on the. It's just a couple of small edits, and we can just change it. Can I go ahead? Rod?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So the problem was the governor no longer had a list of states, high risk states, because so many of them now are hotspots. So he changed it to anyone coming from any other state that doesn't border New York State. So there is no list of states that, they used to be constantly changing as they got more cases or fewer cases. So that first bullet point, it would be a very easy change to say any town employee or official who voluntarily travels out of state instead of to a state listed on New York State's Department of Health website, because there is no list anymore. So who voluntarily travels out of state must, you just skip down a couple of lines, must self-report to their supervisor of such travel and then you would insert, and are subject to quarantine restrictions as outlined on, and then you go back, the New York State Department of Health website, period. Okay, and then the rest is the same. And then Judy's last addition at the very end of that keeps it up to date, that the changes conform to any changes that the governor comes up with. But I wanted to leave out the reference to a list, because there is no list anymore, and we don't want to send employees to the website looking for this list and not finding it. So if you can follow that change, or I could send it to you, but it just removes the reference to a list of states. So there was that, and there were a couple of other things that just escaped my attention, and it's just 1 or 2 word changes. The intro to that section, the travel policy, there's a reference to people who are in contact with sick people. That is dangerously misleading. It should say contact with infected people, even if they are not symptomatic, are at risk of being exposed to the virus, because we've been told a million times that the problem is people who are asymptomatic can spread the illness. And if we put it the way it is there, it makes people think, well, I haven't been in contact with anyone who is sick. So instead of sick, we should say infected, and then we should add even if they are not symptomatic. Okay. And then there was one other small change, but it's important. On the next page, under safety policies, just remove the word cloth, that first sentence, including the use of cloth masks. The cloth is a holdover from in the early days when surgical masks weren't available to the general public and had to be conserved for healthcare workers. So now we would just say including the use of masks. And in fact, Cayuga Medical Center has signs up asking the public to wear surgical masks or procedure masks, not cloth masks, because surgical masks actually filter out the virus better than cloth masks do. So if we just delete the word cloth, we'll be good. And I think we may have done that elsewhere, and I just missed that one.
Okay.
So are those changes okay?
Yeah, and did we move this in second? I don't think we did. Right?
I don't think we have.
Okay, so So let's just put those changes in and see if there's any other comments, discussion before we see if someone wants to move the resolution with.
And Judy, if you like, I'll actually send you that wording if you didn't catch all of it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rich.
I have a couple clarifying questions for Pat. If we strike the word cloth from that sentence, we're not prohibiting the use of cloth masks.
No.
We're just,
No.
eliminating the implication that that's the type of mask that should be used.
Right, and we certainly don't want to discourage people wearing a surgical mask.
Sure. And now my second question for you, Pat, goes back to what you talked about in the beginning of your time, which was you indicated that you made a reference to travel to any place other than an adjacent state.
Right.
But that's not what your proposed
Right.
language.
Right. Right. All I did was remove the reference to a list of states that, require quarantine. What I want to do is, refer to the New York State Health Department's website, send people there to find the latest information, but not refer to a list because it's not there anymore. So I don't want people looking for a list, but without going into excruciating detail, which may even change.
Sure.
I just wanted to send them to the website, tell them that they have to tell their supervisor, and tell them that they have to abide by the quarantine regulations, whatever they happen to be at the time, from the New York State Department of Health website.
Right. So according to this, if I travel to New York City, for example, I wouldn't have to report that to anyone? Pat?
No. Out of state. No, it is out of state.
No, it's not.
It's not travel to New York City. It's out of state.
So I wouldn't have to report that. Okay, even though that the landscape could presumably be completely different in other parts of the state, but this is
right.
allowed.
Well, that's why we have that last point that Judy added, which I think is important. But I just didn't want to have blatantly inaccurate information. Right now, it's out of state.
Okay, I have a couple other comments, but I'll wait for the resolution to be moved, I guess. I'll move the resolution.
Thank you, Rich. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Rich.
Okay, I'll start off with I have a couple typos and then a couple questions. On page 1, toward the bottom under town policy, the first bullet point, second line, I think it should be taking their temperature, not taking your temperature, because you're referring to employees as a aggregate. So change your to their. And then a couple.
Deals for days starting Wednesday, November 11th.
Is that me? Oh. Next page.
Doing things.
Second and third bullet points. This is more of another grammatical issue. Is it employees that or employees who? I'll leave that up to Pat.
Who?
Thank you. So those two that's should be whose. And then down same page, third bullet point from the bottom, the town may, in extreme emergency situations, return an employee with confirmed COVID-19, blah, 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 blah. And so I guess at whose discretion, when it says the town, who makes that determination that something constitutes an extreme emergency situation that warrants this level of exception?
It would probably, I'm sure that the only case this would come into is for Public Works. And so I think it's safe to say that Judy, Joe, and I would confer.
Okay, maybe that needs to be, I don't really know whether that needs to be spelled out or not, but the town is a bit vague there.
And I might kind of add after some issues kind of coming up, extreme emergency situation. We're getting down to having fewer and fewer staff and still being able to do some things. So we are working with the health department on what concerns they have. So.
I'm sorry, Judy, were you suggesting a change in the wording there? I didn't catch all of that.
I would suggest taking out extreme.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. We need to, yeah, okay, because we're potentially running into personnel shortages, is what you're saying?
Potentially.
Okay.
Rich and Pat, would you be okay with that if we took
Yeah.
out?
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
And hold on a second. Let me get. I have more. The next page. So I guess with the bottom of the next page, travel policy bullet point. It says that the whatever it says that shall not be permitted to return to work in person at town premises, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes on to say the town supervisor has the discretion to allow a return to work in person upon consideration of various factors. So I wonder why is there a prohibition at all if the supervisor has the discretion? I mean, is it?
When we passed this back a few months ago, when this first came into play, we had a long discussion and added that sentence that the town supervisor had some discretion. So the beginning part matches what the executive whatever order said at that point.
Okay, it's not a huge deal. Let me go to the next page, second bullet point. So if the employee or official is unable to work remotely during the required 14 days, will not be paid. And this is related to travel that wasn't town related, right? This is just somebody goes somewhere, they're deemed to have gone, they need to be quarantined for whatever reason, they're not going to get paid. And so I guess, are there any instances under which travel would be deemed to have been essential? Any family emergency situations or something like that? Or are we just looking at all travel to all out of state travel? Period. End of story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, all travel. And then how does that square with compensation during quarantine periods that are presumed to have been the result of local exposure or exposure on the job? People get paid in those situations, right?
Yeah, there's a different procedure for COVID pay, as it, depending on how it relates. Like if somebody is tested positive, then there's a 14-day COVID leave.
So we have no idea whether someone's high risk behavior 5 miles from town is more risky than someone who drives to a funeral in another state.
Yep.
But we're paying the person who has conducted high risk behavior 5 miles from town, and we're not paying the other person. So that seems a bit arbitrary to me, but I guess we'll just have to live with it. And I don't know if there's anything else. That's all I had on this.
Rich?
Yeah.
It might help. It might clarify it. If instead of we say who voluntarily travels, we could say who travels for non-work related reasons or something like that. Would that make it clearer?
Yeah, I mean, there are very few instances. I don't envision anyone being sent away to a conference or anything in another state under the current climate, right? I was just talking about we really can't control people, in Tompkins County.
Right.
People could be doing whatever,
Yeah.
and
No,
and,
this
and
is
those
just
folks,
the travel
those folks are in line for compensation, and other folks who are perhaps much more protective just by virtue of having crossed the state line
Right.
have to, right.
Well, this follows the policy that Cuomo outlined. He was talking about travel policy, and he was the one that started the idea of
Sure, I understand.
no
we need
compensation.
to disincentivize cross pollination and all that. I understand that. So, okay, that's all I had. Thanks.
Other comments? Well, Rich and Pat, with a motion and second to approve the change. Any other discussion before we vote? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Unanimous. Judy, thanks for your work on this. Am I being muffled again? Moving on to authorization to sign an amendment to the infiltration and inflow Danby system study. The board authorized that we wanted some additional sewer meters to be added, and that's costing a little bit more than we had originally set aside. So this is authorizing the supervisor to execute that change with, is it Larson Design Group? Dan, is there anything you want to say about this?
I just want to clarify, I enlightened a few of you folks to the ongoing issues with the data, the flow data that we received. Originally, it was flawed. They are going out and getting us additional flow data that was part of the original contract, and they're giving that to us for free, obviously. This is an ad. The timing when we went out originally, the timing was bad. There was a huge water main break on Ithaca College's campus, and it skewed a lot of our data down that way. So we're going to remeter that campus. We feel there's some high infiltration coming off that campus, and so this is an additional add to the contract to do that work.
Would someone like to move the resolution? Tiana, is there a second? Eric, discussion, questions? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. We have pulled we will not be discussing an easement and right-of-way related to the Emerson and the trail. Maybe at the study session. Susan, is that what you're hoping for the November 23rd study session? I think we're close.
Yep, their attorney asked that we pull it because there's still a few items that have to be worked out.
Okay. So moving on to the resolution, supplemental agreement with BN Associates Landscape Architecture to continue providing professional services associated with the Inlet Valley on Myra Road. Remember, they've been working with the Economic Development Committee to help give us a way forward to incentivize businesses there. So this does two things. It extends the contract till August 31st. And it just, we had already allocated $25,000. So it continues, it just follows that. Sue, is there anything you wanted to say about this? Would someone like to move the resolution? Rich, is there a second? A second. Questions, comments? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. The next is authorization for supervisor to sign an MOU with Cornell University and the City of Ithaca regarding necessary sewer upgrades associated with the North Campus residential expansion project. This took a while to resolve, right, Dan? Lots of emails, and I think you've, anyway. Would someone like to move this resolution?
I'll move it.
Is there a second? Second by Rich. Questions, comments? It's always nice when all those conversations apparently paid off, Rich, that the town board is ready to vote on this. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Moving on to the consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Eric, is there a second? Rich, Any discussion? And this is where you will note the new holiday list with any questions, comments? All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. You received the code enforcement report. You received the financial report ending October 31st. Any report of town officials? Any reports from committees or intermunicipal organizations?
Hold on, Rod. I just wanted to say that just because we had started a conversation about the gun range and had been contacted by a few folks over the years, did a little bit of digging around, and I did have a conversation with a veteran officer at IPD, and he indicated now he had been in charge of the range for about 15 years, and he indicated that his research went back as far as 1952, perhaps, in terms of when the range was established. So that might provide some guidance as to whether any zoning, whether the evolution of our zoning over the years could be used as a way to potentially address that. So it appears as though the gun range predates our initial zoning ordinance, which, as far as we can tell, was 1954, maybe. I see Sue Ritter nodding along there. And then just again, some of you got copied late in the day on a letter from Charter Communications related to a funding impasse that we're having with them regarding some equipment that has been irreparable for 6 months now, and one of the PEG channels has been operating on a contingency basis using equipment at City Hall, and that is because of their upgrade, that functionality has gone away. So we're continuing to go back and forth with Charter. I'm awaiting an opinion from the Public Service Commission as far as how to proceed with that. There are some other issues there as well, and also now reconnected with the woman at Charter who is in charge of their franchising. So they're going to, reportedly, they're going to provide us with another draft before Thanksgiving of the cable franchise. So there you go.
Will you keep us updated? And Rich, let us know if you want the gun range, shooting range to be on, probably not the study session in November, but maybe the study session in December.
I think for discussion at least, and to try to figure out if there's a way forward. We're still gathering information. I know that Eric, also lives up on South Hill, has attested at times to the conspicuous nature of the operation of the range. So I think it certainly rises to the level of a conversation, given all of the development that's occurred there since 1952. So.
Any other reports like that? You also have the correspondence list. We've already started referring to some of the correspondence. Any questions about what's on the correspondence list? Any other business for tonight? I just learned that we don't have to have a motion to adjourn. So we're adjourned. Go enjoy the evening. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thanks.